So anyway, let's begin. And we'll begin from the line number 26. Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin laqad nasabtu bihi naslan lidhi ukumi. So line number 26. So he says, I seek forgiveness for saying something without, or saying a thing, or making a statement without following it through. And intentions and statements are two different things. So saying something has a weight of responsibility where one has to carry out, or unless there's some type of impediment or there's a problem with carrying it out, then our tradition, the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasallam, in many hadith clearly outline that the idea that practice is always is more important than word, i.e. that words shouldn't, number one, be said in talking about your own actions anyway, but also that the idea of telling other people to do things and not doing them yourselves. We know that that's what he means, because the next line states, next part of the line says, لَقَدْ نَسَبْتُ بِهِ نَسْلًا الَّذِي أُكُمِي. It's like an impotent man attributing a child to himself. Now, intentions are different to statements. Why? Because intentions can be they're all internal. And not only that, you don't need to share your intentions. So that's why in the hadith in the Mal bin Niyat, and many other hadith about intentions being rewarded, that if you intend something and if you don't carry it out, you're still rewarded. But when you say something, it's a different thing altogether. Number one, if one says something to another and doesn't fulfill their promise, yani man wa'ada wa akhlafa, or akhlafa, somebody who makes a promise and doesn't fulfill it. Things of that nature, number one. Number two, to say something and not do it yourself is also very problematic. Now, Busiri in this line, why would he say something like that? And like Ibn Ajiba argues that this is more so out of his humility. It's more, and to be honest, it will be the case for anybody anyway. The idea of falling short, everybody falls short. So even if if a person is doing their best or trying to do their best, they'll still feel that there's shortcomings there. And I talked about another few points last week on that statement. Now the next line, the next two lines which I want to give some attention to today, he says, أمرتك الخير لكن ما أتمرت به وما استقمت فما قولي لك استقمي. That I ordered you to do good, أمرتك الخير, but then didn't heed my own advice. لكن ما أتمرت به, meaning I didn't take that on board. وما استقمت, I was not upright myself. وما قولي, فما قولي. So what of my telling you, istaqim, be upright. Now this is a play on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement in the Quran, where Allah says, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ فَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. And that has several layers, that verse. It's a very important verse in the Quran for all of us. So Allah give us tawfiq to carry things out. Allah says, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ, do you give amr to people? So I want to unpack this idea of amr ma'ruf here. So God says atamuruna nas. Amara ya'muru in Arabic means to command or to order. So do you command others or order others bil bir, Allah says, with goodness, with piety. Wa tansawna, nasiya yansa in Arabic, it means to forget, and forget yourselves. Wa antum tatlun al-kitab, do you not, whilst reading the book of Allah. And I'll unpack that part, but first I want to explain this first part. So this idea of, isn't it part of Islam and isn't it part of our religion that we have to do al-amru bi-ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar? So especially when people convert to Islam or start to practice Islam, especially if they're young, young by young, I mean maybe late teens, early 20s, they have a habit, because of their zeal, to now want everybody to kind of heed to what they're saying, because they've discovered something very new and it inspired them or made them feel good. They want to now make everybody else feel good, maybe. It happens to converts as well. When people convert to Islam, it's very odd. It's really odd, actually, this phenomenon that when non-Muslims convert to Islam. I don't know if most Muslims that maybe help them convert, or Muslims around them encourage them to do this. I don't know who encourages them, but you see that these new Muslims now all of a sudden are trying to make other people Muslim when they're not spiritually grounded themselves, and it can be very dangerous, because what ends up happening is you have a burnout effect, and then they start to have problems themselves. And that's a point I'm picking up on, is that when people become practicing or religious, or when they find something new, it's like buying something. When you buy something new, you want people to see it, like you want to show it to people. Look, I've got a new house or a new car, because it gives you a good feeling as well, and a feeling of some kind of feeling of affirmation as well, a validation. Sorry, that what you've done. Oh yeah, really good job, and it's a nice car, and I'm happy that you have it. So with Islam, is something that also you can give to other people. It's not a it's not it's almost infinitely divisible in the sense that you can give it to whoever you want. So they feel that, but the problem is why do they do that? And they do that on the, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes on the pretext of a few statements. Number one, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu "Balighu anni walau ayah." That's number one, and that's one. So that's a positive. So let's take the positive first. That the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu "Balighu anni walau ayah," that declare from me even if it's one verse. So this is like everybody's like, therefore, all us Muslims, that we got to go out and tell everybody about whatever it may be. We got to tell them something about Islam. This firstly doesn't make any sense. Number one, it just doesn't make any rational sense. But also, it's not legally sound. The idea, it doesn't make any rational sense, because when we tell somebody anything of that we perceive to be beneficial, it depends on. And let's say something is beneficial in and of itself. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's beneficial to tell another person in every circumstance, every situation, just rationally speaking. It may be a point where, and I give you an example. Imagine you want to tell somebody about Islam, but they're at a particular point in their life where they will more likely have a problem with it, and more likely reject it almost immediately because of a certain circumstance that you're aware of as well. Is it really logical or rational to give them advice at that point? So there's so many circumstances at play of when you're to tell somebody about something or not. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the negative, which is often the case, where people follow another hadith, but that hadith doesn't mean that from a legal perspective, structurally, the hadith is, there's number one, whoever makes amr must be alim bima ya'muru bihi, must know what he's commanding, must know the ramifications of it. Number two, al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, that he must have wisdom, he must understand that, and must have vast amounts of experience, or enough experience to understand the situation and what they're saying and what they're delivering. And a perfect example of this is take a Speaker's Corner. Now, Speaker's Corner now is such a toxic place that even whatever little good people try to do there, it's just overshadowed and outnumbered and predominated by all the problems that people have that Muslims have caused there. So many people have been put off Islam. Many people have been put off Islam because of the attitudes of the Muslims there. So just because you solve a 2% of an issue, if you're the negative attitude of the public towards you is a 98%, then it's a huge problem. Now, the second part of it is forbidding evil. That isn't obligatory for us to go out and tell everybody that, oh, what you're doing is wrong. So there's a hadith that people employ for that. Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyir biyadihi falam yastati' فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه فذلك أضعف الإيمان. That whoever sees an evil amongst you, فليغير بيده, he should change it with his hand. If he cannot, with his tongue. If he cannot, then in his heart. And this is the weakest state of Iman. Many of the ulama have commentated on this. Sheikh Salih Farfou has a brilliant commentary on this, talking about the three different levels that a person must fulfill before he does any of that. Some of the scholars state actually the first part is in reference to leaders and scholars, as leaders and governments, that the governments have autonomy and authorities to stop something by their hands. A normal person can't just go and stop somebody doing something. It's very unlikely that you can just go and do that. You can't just take a stick and go beat people up, or do things of that nature. Governments can enforce law, and that's their job. Otherwise, we have a form of vigilantism, and Islam is completely against this form of anarchy or going against the legal system of any legal system. Um, Even if it's a Muslim country and they're not fulfilling, let's say, the law as they should be, but you can't just go and rebel against the government. This is anarchy, and Muslim scholars have clearly written about the idea of rebelling against the government in any way or form. Number two, if you can't change it with your hand, change it with your tongue. This is for the people who know, and the people who I mentioned earlier. And some of them say this is for the ulama or the people in the know. Ghazali talks about how the idea, it's like a doctor giving medicine to an ill person. He knows exactly which ill person requires which medicine and what the amounts are. But an ignorant person doesn't know what medicine to give to a particular person. He doesn't know how to treat that illness. So number one, he'll give the wrong medicine, which will probably kill the person and make them very ill. And even if he knows what medicine to give, he'll give it in the wrong quantities. So he'll give too little or too much, inevitably either killing the person or making them very unwell. So that's the second point. And the third person is the state for everybody, and the state of Akhir Zaman. The Prophet ﷺ said, close to the day of judgment, there'll be a group in my community that will come across things, and they will see them, and they will not be able to do anything, but they will curse it or hate it in their hearts, and they are the people of Iman. So that's a state for every believer. So he says, Amartuk al khayra, I told you to do good. Lakin ma tamartu bihi, but I didn't do it myself. So the statement of God, coming back to that. Allah says, Atamuruna nasa bil bir. You tell people to do good. May Allah forgive us for telling people to do good and not doing it ourselves. And I think this is the state of every believer to some extent. Then he says, وَمَسْتَقَمْتُ فَمَا قَوْلِي لَكَسْتَقِمِ. And فَمَسْتَقَمْتُ, I was not myself upright. Why should I tell you to be upright? Yeah, the danger of preaching. And Ibn Ajib has some good points here that I marked as well. He quotes, for instance, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whose Aman is brought on the Day of Judgment. And he is quite graphic, and he's been punished. And they say, what did you do? And he said, I used to enjoin you to do good deeds, but I did not do them. And I used to forbid you from doing evil deeds, yet I would do them myself. And he quotes that verse that I mentioned, do you enjoin people in righteousness, yet forget it yourself whilst you recite scripture? This, of course, is different to children, your own children. Like, does that mean that if we do something wrong and then we should tell our children? Children are different because tarbiyah, you should want your children to be better than you in every way and form. And it's kind of an exemption altogether in a sense, but at the same time, we should always be trying to fulfill whatever we're telling our children. We should also be trying to be people who follow that through ourselves. The last line of the chapter is a wonderful line in which Busiri states, وَلَا تَزَوَّدْتُ قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ نَافِلَةً وَلَمْ أُصَلِّ سِوَى فَرْضٍ وَلَا أَصُومٍ. وَلَا تَزَوَّدُ يَتَزَوَّدُ in Arabic means to prepare a meal for the journey. It's a hadith used in Badul Wahi as well, the first hadith in Sahih Bukhari, the hadith, the beginning of Revelation. The same verb is used there. It means to prepare a meal for a journey. He's tazawwada. Allah uses this word in the Quran. Tazawwadu fa inna khayra zadi taqwa. Prepare a meal, prepare for the journey, or prepare for the best preparation is taqwa. And also the word zad is used. Zad in Arabic is often means the food that you take on a journey with you, as zad, or provisions they call them, as zad. Zad is the provisions that you take on a journey. He says, وَلَا تَزَوَّدُ, I haven't prepared قَبْلَ الْمَوْتِ, before my death, meaning I haven't prepared provisions. نَافِلَةً, anything that was supererogatory or extra, voluntary. وَلَمْ أُصَلِّ, I did not pray, siwa, except fardin, my obligations, obligatory prayer, وَلَمْ أَصُمِ, and I did not fast, meaning outside of Ramadan. Now, this is a wonderful line. And it's a kind of some say that he means here that he's being humble here, and nafila here means min kathratin nawafil, like I didn't prepare so many and I didn't fast so much. Now, first Ibn Ajiba talks about this idea that he's more likely talking about his rank compared to probably the Muqarrabin and other people. So that's true. But then doesn't it ask the big question that the messenger of God, a man came to him in the famous hadith of the hadith Damam min Tha'laba, who, when the Prophet ﷺ explained to him the obligatory acts of prayer, he said the following. He says, by Allah, I will neither do more or less than that. And the narration states that he said, if I pray my 5 daily prayers, وَأَحْلَلْتُ الْحَلَالَ وَحَرَمْتُ الْحَرَامَ, and I do that which is halal and stay away with that haram, will I enter Jannah? And the Prophet ﷺ said yes. Well, isn't that enough then? Isn't it enough to do that, for us all to do that? Ibn Ajiba gives 2 replies. The first reply is, then he even admits that it's not a very good reply. He said some state and talk about that maybe certain revelations hadn't, or the Prophet ﷺ hadn't prayed certain sunnahs at this point, so there wasn't much to do. He said that's not a good answer to that, meaning he didn't know of the additional things. The second answer, he writes that it is probable that the Prophet ﷺ understood from the words of the Bedouin that his intention was that he would not alter Allah's rulings by adding or subtracting from them, and would not contravene Allah's commands or innovate anything himself outside of Sunnah acts. As such, he did not intend the Sunnah acts, and in fact, they did not cross his mind. And that's a good point, that he wasn't talking about that. He wasn't saying, I want to do any more than that, meaning I won't add to this. This is the obligation, and this is what I accept to be the obligation. And that's a good answer. Also, some say that this is an inference that the basic that must be done by every believer is the fard prayer. And if somebody sticks to that, like one of the scholars mentioned, that I remember, he said if somebody prays their 5 daily prayers and stays away from haram and enjoys only in halal, that they will be kind of saints in this era. I tend to think that has some validity, that statement, because it's very difficult for people to stay away from haram. By haram, and a'ani min hadha al-haram, what I mean by this haram is take our mass kind of involvement in social media. I know it's a kind of cliche now, social media this, social media that. And by social media, I'm not talking about media in its entirety, but social media as in where you interact with other people often brings out the worst in us. Instagram is a testimony to that. A place where, although I know now that a lot of businesses flourish on Instagram, it has uses and benefits. I'm not denying that aspect, but if people are just using it for personal reasons to put themselves up, then it can have huge ramifications when it comes to spirituality, especially in relation to ostentation, in relation to confidence, self-confidence as well, and things of this nature. Validation, it can really affect people's lives. To assume that will make us happy, or to assume that if other people see us and like what we're doing, we will be happy. That's a huge problem, because it's never the case. Actually, history has proven that, as testimony to that, that other people's opinions of us don't make us happy necessarily. Probably prevent us from being sad, but definitely do not make us happy. And my point is, it's difficult to stay away from haram. So for men, just as an example, if men are on Instagram, what's the relevance here? And the relevance here is the point that I'm mentioning about in this day and age, this hadith of the Bedouin of praying 5 times a day. He said, haramtul haram, and staying away from haram. But men are on things like that. It's very likely within a few days of having an app of that nature, sooner or later things will come upon your feed that are just unavoidable. Especially women and their accounts, and now the way that haram works is the devil is very tricky in the sense that the statements that we have. I'll give you an example of this. Now we're like, so there was this. I caught a clip of a discussion online, a podcast, where somebody was saying that there's no evidence that states that pornography is haram. It is the most absurd statement that I've heard possibly in my life, on the top three anyway, definitely in the top three, that there's no evidence to prove. And this person was supposedly a scholar. I don't know him. He was from another country. And he said that in his research, it's you have to be careful about saying something's haram. Wallahi, if we've reached a state that people who are studied are saying things like that, then it's the end of times, definitely. For somebody to think that pornography is not haram is, I don't know where to begin. I mean, let's leave just even the Sharia to one side. Just read books like Your Brain on Porn. There's another book, I think it's called Pornification. There's several books on it that I've read. And look at the level of harm that it brings about in a society, without even looking at the seeing naked people and all these types of things. But that's the state we live in. So the devil is very tricky, and what he does is he will rephrase things for you in that sense. So he'll say, oh look, nudity, for instance. Like that, it's only on a screen, number one. Pornography in China, for instance, in anime is a big thing. Oh, they're only cartoons. Or so therefore it's not real. Or the people in the program are acting big. Their roles are as robots. They're real people. So they're just robots. So the desensitization, for instance, just goes on and on and on. So keeping away from haram is very difficult now. And that's why one has to be very alert and know that almost most of spirituality is in the digital realm now. So anyway, that's the answer to the question. We begin a new chapter now. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال الناظم رحمه الله تعالى وانفعنا بعلومه ظلمت سنة من أحيا الظلام إلى إن اشتقت قدما ضر من ورمي. This is the beginning of chapter 3. This will be the highlight of the whole book is chapter 3. Chapter 3 is everybody's favorite. It's the one that contains a line. Muhammadun سيد الكونين وثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. So chapter 3 is the one that everybody sings the most. It'll possibly have the most commentary as well. I want to begin with his first statement. Dhalamtu, I have. Dhalama comes from the word dhulma, which means darkness. And that's why the word is used for oppression as well. He states, Dhalamtu, I have done injustice to the path of the one who prayed at night until his feet complained of pain and swelling. So the word sunnah is used here, meaning that I have not followed his sunnah, his way. This is in light of the hadith, the famous hadith narrated by Imam Muslim in his sound collection, that on the day of judgment, a group of people, they come to the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, Ilayya, come to me. And then the angels stop them, and he says, why are you stopping them? And the angels say, you do not know what they did after you, that they left your way. And he says, suhqan to them, get them away from me, get them away from me. This is a hadith talking about the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the dangers of leaving the sunnah, the way of the Messenger of God ﷺ. So it's a play on that. And we can never fulfill the sunnah entirely. We'll always fall short of fulfilling the sunnah of the Messenger of God ﷺ. So he's complaining about that. And then he uses a play on words. There's a play on words here where he uses the word dhalama and ahya. He said the sunnah of, so he used the word dhalama, which means darkness, or I have done injustice, I have cast darkness upon the way of the Messenger of God who brought light. Ahya here is who brought life, and who brought ahya dhalam. So here could be translated as brought light to the evening or the nighttime, or brought guidance when there was misguidance. But it means ahya means to give life. He gave life to dhalam, to darkness, to darkness. Meaning I've done the opposite. The messenger of God came and he spread light everywhere, and I have cast a darkness upon his sunnah alayhi salatu wasalam, meaning I've neglected it. So he uses these words, these opposites. They say in Arabic, تُعْرَفُ الْأَشْيَاءُ بِأَضْدَادِهَا, things are known by their opposites. So he, and then he says that whose way sunnah is it? And he introduced, remember up until this point, Busiri has not told anybody of who he's talking about in the poem. Nobody knows who he's talking about, who his relationship is with, that he's constantly complaining about his own state in relation to somebody. So he introduces the Prophet subtly, and he introduces him through the idea that I have left his way, or I have not followed his way fully, rather. Who was he? And this is the first description of the Messenger of God in the Burda. The first description of the Messenger of God in the Burda of Busiri, Akwakib al-Durriya fi Madhi Khayl al-Bariyya, is chapter number 3, line number 1. The first line of chapter number 3, and he describes him as who? Anishtaqat qadamahu durra min warami, the one who would pray till his feet complained of painful swelling, or in our translation, the translation reads, until his feet complained of painful swelling. So this is the first introduction of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. Now, the sunnah here, what's meant by the sunnah, can include everything, of course. But there are, sunnah has many divisions. Sunnah lughatan, sunnah hukman. Some sunnah are, if we use the word sunnah, some are legal, some are merely linguistic and habitual. Legal sunnahs are from amongst them, for instance, is using the miswak, that the Prophet ﷺ said, if it were not difficult for my ummah, I would have made using the miswak or the siwak, meaning brushing their teeth before every prayer. That's mashru'. You can clearly see the sunnah there. And other narrations where the Prophet ﷺ uses a command, where he says, do this or do that. And it becomes part of the sunnah. Most of these sunnah are to do with character. Some of them are to do with the external, not many, but some of them are to, like the siwak is one of them. So what do we do with things like the way the Prophet ﷺ slept? Is it sunnah to sleep in the way that the Messenger of God slept, the way he positioned his body? If we are going to take the meaning of sunnah to be, did he do it? Definitely, then it's sunnah that he was something that he did, alayhi salatu wasalam. But in that particular way, that form the Prophet ﷺ slept, did he say, if one does it now, should they be going around telling everybody, sleep exactly like that? No, not necessarily at all. It's something that the Prophet ﷺ left, and I believe that everything that he did had hikmah in it. That if one does it, they'll be rewarded for their intention, but sleeping that way in and of itself doesn't have a specific reward because it was a habitual action. But if one has that intention, then there's intention of reward because the Prophet did it and that was your intention. There's reward in that. But there's no kind of legal reward in that sense for it. Now, another sunnah that is the Prophet ﷺ is hukman. He told people to do. For instance, he said, "Kul bi yaminik," eat with your right hand. The Messenger of God clearly told the people to do that, and things of that nature are sunnah, what we call sunnah. But there's a difference between habitual actions and actions that statements that the Messenger of God made to other people. These are very important differentiation, a very, very important differentiation. And what's happened nowadays is that people have taken those habitual acts or actions, because a lot of them are over, and they've neglected the sunnahs that were that the Prophet commanded people to do. Often they've neglected that, and especially the sunnahs of character. So they've adopted that which people can see and left that which people which are internal. And this is a very problematic thing. It's reversing the order of affairs, for instance. And sometimes even ostentation can fall into it, because it's like, I'm doing this because it's sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but then you can clearly see in the person's character that he doesn't follow any of the sunnah. So one needs to be very careful of that, and extreme levels of that can be taken. Inshallah, we'll stop there for today. Next week we'll have a thorough start for chapter 3. إن شاء الله تعالى أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم وأتوب إليه ولسائر المسلمين.